George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
Sad sack Private GrantShapps, otherwise known as Green, and sundry other aliases in his inglorious business career before becoming Britain's Defence Secretary, has never heard a shot fired in anger, not even on a hunt. He's not got the class to be on a hunt. Well, he threatened Russia yesterday that Britain was going to put soldiers into Ukraine, and the Royal Navy was going to somewhere find ships to send into the naval encounters against the Russian naval forces. Today, Corporal RishiSunak, beleaguered in Liverpool, demonstrators surrounding the Conservative Party conference slapped Private Shapps stroke Green down and said he'd just made it all up. It was absolute rubbish. In a second shot for NATO, the anti-NATO candidate wins the general election in Slovakia. Now NATO has more than one opponent inside its ranks. And we'll be looking at the New York City thug, JamaalBowman, the man who talked about the hallowed halls of Congress in relation to January 6th, wrecking the joint, pulling the fire alarm, all to avoid a vote. Oh, and we've got the former wife of the greatest, the champion, MuhammadAli. Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows, the only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
And we've got a potentially record-breaking poll also. Should gender reassignment for children be a criminal offence? Yes or no? 20,000 people have already voted, and the show has just begun. Get your vote in now, yes or no, on my Telegram channel, on my Twitter feed, on the YouTube community stream, or on the YouTube stream that you may well be watching. Do you remember they said that the January 6th protesters had desecrated the hallowed halls of the US Congress? Do you remember the hushed tones with which they described these bison-hatted, bead-wearing buffalo soldiers strolling through the corridors of the US Congress? Well, get this. A Democratic Party congressman, a man I've just seen behaving in a way that you no longer see outside bars in Sauchiehall Street in Glasgow, whilst berating another member of Congress, a name that you may not yet be familiar with outside of the United States, but a former member of the Squad, a man who was supposed to be a political progressive. In order to save Joe Biden's budget, including gigantic tranches of new money for weapons for the Kiev regime in the war in Ukraine, he actually triggered a fire alarm. He broke the glass and pulled the string, or whatever they have in Washington, D.C., in order to create a fire emergency, placing people at risk, sending the fire department hard-pressed in New York City, as he should know, no less hard-pressed in Washington, D.C., triggering them onto an emergency footing, all to avoid a vote which might have cost Biden's budget for war, weapons, missiles and bombs. There he is there on my screen now. This thug should no longer be serving in the US Congress. It is not just a crime in the United States. It is a felony in the United States to unlawfully and unwarrantedly trigger a fire alarm and a fire emergency, akin to shouting fire in a darkened cinema. This man is not fit to wear the clothes of an American congressman and should be drummed out of office. Unless they were being hypocritical about the January 6th affair, do you think that's even remotely possible that that could be true? But that was the least of the setbacks for NATO over this weekend. The biggest of them was undoubtedly the stunning defeat suffered by the pro-American, pro-NATO, pro-Ukrainian regime in Slovakia. They were defeated by a man whose campaign was based around his first act, which he promised would be the immediate and complete cessation of all aid, military and economic, from Slovakia to the kleptocratic regime in Kiev. He said the Soviet Union liberated us from the Nazis. It's time to show Russia some respect. He's being described by a series of hysterics in the media as pro-Putin, pro-Russian. Apparently, Putin has done it again, influenced the outcome of yet another poll in yet another country, having elected Donald Trump in the first place. Now he's picking the prime ministers in Slovakia. Well, this is a major problem for the EU and for NATO, because this man has a veto. This man can veto EU decisions. This man can veto NATO decisions. And allied with the Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban, there is now a significant blocking mechanism for those who wish to give away the economic future of Europe's children and grandchildren to the creep Zelensky is now in grave danger. Their majority has gone. We have a mover and we have a seconder for an alternative point of view. This is very significant indeed. And in Britain, we, forgive us, had the most significant victory for us of all. There's a man called GrantShapps, whom I've been lampooning on radio and television for the best part of 20 years, since he entered my field of vision as GrantShapps. A huckster is how you would describe him. In the Second World War, he'd have been called a spiv. He's a man with a motley business career behind him, a business career littered in failure and falsification. He was caught falsifying his name. That's right. Britain has a defense secretary who habitually and for self-interested reasons pretended to be someone else. A Michael Green is the name that has stuck in my mind, but there were actually multiple aliases under which he sought to conduct business. In fact, in an early sign of the times, sometimes when he was signing letters, he was a woman. He was identifying as a woman. Not Michelle Mone, but something not dissimilar. If you get my drift, British viewers will understand. This man ended up as a Conservative MP, though he could well have ended up in many other places. But he ended up as a Conservative MP and then held more government offices than almost anyone in history in the dog days of the Boris Johnson and Liz Truss administration. I've lost track of how many ministerial posts he's had, but he was then shunted to the periphery by RishiSunak. And then, when the Defense Secretary Ben Wallace, he of the Battle of Balaclava, stepped down from office, inexplicably, RishiSunak sent for GrantShapps, Michael Green, Michel Mon et al. And no one could quite understand it. Some thought it was a subversive move to undermine Britain's military. After all, which of the officer class is going to take orders willingly from this little twerp, this little spiv? But others thought, well, it's a sign that he's downgrading the importance of the war and the importance of Britain's contribution to it. But the thing about a spiv is he loves the attention. And so this particular spiv yesterday told the Daily Telegraph, the Conservative Party's paper of record, that alone of all the NATO countries, officially, Britain was going to send its armed forces, who could all fit into Villa Park in Birmingham, by the way, in toto, Army, Navy, and Air Force. He was going to send them, boots on the ground and all, into Ukraine, to train the Ukrainians, don't you know? They're badly in want of our training. That's why they're doing so well in the war. And not only that, he threatened to send the Royal Navy into naval encounters with the nuclear-armed Russian Navy. Now, I was a member of Parliament for many decades, representing a naval shipbuilding yard. I was forever agitating for the Royal Navy to be brought up to strength and for the shipyard in my constituency to build the resulting ships. So I keep a weather eye on the Royal Navy. And the last time I looked, Britain's Navy cannot police the English Channel, where thousands of people cross illegally into Britain to be shipped to 4-star hotels forever, perhaps, at the British taxpayers' expense. The Royal Navy is unable to stop them. But we're going to fight the Russian Navy in the Black Sea. This ranks up there with the most unbelievable statements made by Ben Wallace that he was going to avenge his regiment's ignominy when they were slaughtered at the Battle of Balaclava in the Crimean War more than 150 years ago. Ben was still smarting from the march of the ride of the 600 into the Russian guns. But GrantShapps has outdone himself, I thought, when I thought of Britain's emaciated Royal Navy with 2 aircraft carriers that are non-functioning being sent to fight the Russian Navy. Now, I was just getting over the shock of this and trying to look on the bright side, that this would surely be the end of GrantShapps' military career. The first time a Russian missile landed on top of the British soldiers, that would surely be it. When out came RishiSunak, believe it or not, Britain's Prime Minister. As Joe Biden put it, go figure. RishiSunak told the world in public that Shapps was talking through his hat, that no British soldiers would officially be sent into Ukraine. The idea that there are none there already in secret is, of course, entirely fanciful. But an actual deployment, officially, of British soldiers in Ukraine would be the beginning of World War III. An engagement between the emaciated Royal Navy and the Russian Navy would be like the Yangtze incident when the fledgling Chinese Navy in 1949 sank the Sapphire. It would be a humiliation for Britain's armed forces. And that's presumably why RishiSunak has countermanded Private GrantShapps' orders. If not, a resignation from Mr. Green Shapps Surely a sacking is now in order. Britain's armed forces may be small, but they are highly skilled and professional people. They are people that are devoted to their country. They are people that we would rely on to defend us were anyone to attack us. They deserve better than GrantShapps, don't they? Let me have your point of view. Now, coming up very soon, we have the former wife of Muhammad Ali. That's not all she's done in her life. Of course, she's an actress, an author, as well as being the author of one or two of the finest bon mots ever uttered by the most eloquent, articulate sportsman that has ever lived on planet Earth. And so to set the scene, I thought I'd tell just a couple of personal anecdotes. My father, God rest his soul, was the only person I knew, and all the people I knew when Cassius Clay, as he then was, took the World Heavyweight Boxing Championship were all white people. And none of them liked Clay Ali. None of them. In fact, many of them hated him. He was the Louisville Lip. He was a black man that didn't lower his eyes. And when white people talked to him, he was a black man who could not only outfight anybody else, but outtalk them and look much prettier than them whilst doing so. So I got up in the middle of the night when I was 9 years old to watch Cassius Clay whoop the big ugly bear Sonny Liston and become the heavyweight champion of the world and declare, somewhat over the top, screaming over the ropes, I am the greatest, I am the prettiest. And he was the greatest and the prettiest. And so I followed Ali in wonder, in admiration and love, as he fought a series of contenders and then fought his biggest ever battles against the United States government, which, in order to close his mouth, maybe for good, decided to conscript him and send him to fight in Vietnam. Ali refused to fight them Viet Cong, as he put it. He said this war is about white men sending black men to kill red men, to kill. He bamboozled them completely with a series of statements that were in themselves incontestable. That this was a government that was conscripting overwhelmingly black fighters, and many white ones too, many Latino ones too, to go and kill yellow men in the paddy fields of Vietnam, when those yellow men, as Ali put it, had never done him any harm. As he put it, and we'll discuss this in just a minute with his former wife, no Viet Cong ever called me the N-word. But of course, many in the United States had done so. When Ali came home from the Olympic Games, literally wearing the Olympic gold medal that he had won for the US Olympic team, he tried to enter a restaurant in his home city of Louisville, Kentucky, and was told that people like him were not served in this restaurant. At which point he went to a bridge over the river in the city and tossed his Olympic gold medal away. It was, I think, a turning point for him. But I've only got time to tell you about what remains the greatest epiphany of my entire life. Having followed Ali all these years, I was at a Labour Party conference in Blackpool when he had his most legendary of all his many legendary fights. against George Foreman. I got up again in the middle of the night and went to a cinema, because that's the only way you could watch boxing then. Closed circuit cinema in Blackpool. And I watched, there it is there, as Ali roped the dope, soaked up the punishment, and then in a flurry that will never ever be forgotten, came off the ropes. Left, right, left, right, left, right, left, down went the colossus that was George Foreman, the world's most fearsome and heavy puncher. And as Ali raised his arms, having won the world title yet again, I never in my whole life, before or since, experienced a sense of epiphany quite like that one. That's why I'm particularly happy that my guest right now is Dr. Khalilah Camacho-Ali, actress, author, and former wife of Muhammad Ali. And by the way, she's just as eloquent as he was. Stay tuned. I defy anyone to contradict the point that I just made, that every person alive today was born of woman. So why would we say that the people in the labor wards, in the maternity units, are people who are giving birth? Why can't we say women? Why can't we say mothers? Why can't we say women who are breastfeeding, mothers who are breastfeeding? Why do we need to say people who are chest feeding? All of these words, and indeed all of the trend that you say you dissociate yourself from, of transgenderism, transmania, I call it, are all taking rights away from women.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now, we've got that poll running. 21,000 people have now voted in it. Should gender reassignment for children be a criminal offence? Overwhelmingly, people are saying yes, but you don't want this poll not to have your say recorded. So please, should gender reassignment for children be a criminal offence? Yes or no? Get voting now. And if you have any comment on anything I've said or should have said, or any of my guests for that matter, here are the telephone numbers to call. In the UK and Ireland, pardon me, it is 08081965522. That's 08081965522. You can call us, we'll call you back. It will cost you nothing at all. And in the US and Canada, equally, it is toll free. And the number is +1 844 944 3344. That's +1 844 944 3344. And if you're in the rest of the world, it's 44203 966 2625. 44203 966 2625. Now, I've met Dr. Ali before on a previous television show that I had, which will remain nameless for reasons of algorithmic suppression. And I know for a fact she is the brightest and the best. And she's just finished her new book on her former husband, Muhammad Ali. How lucky are we, Dr. Ali, to see you here again, this time on the mother of all talk shows. It is simply wonderful to see you, resplendent as ever. Tell us, first of all, about the book. What's it called? Where can we get it? And what period does it cover?
Well, it's good to see you, Mr. Galloway. You are amazing. You still look very dashing as usual. You aged
Thank you.
beautifully. You're so handsome with the little peach fuzz. That's nice. That's a good look. Before you had nothing but on your face. You was clean, smooth, and now you look a little mature gentleman now.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
I'm getting older,
It's good to
Doctor.
see you again. You look good. You look good, Mr. Galloway. You look great. I love your topics, your shows. You're amazing.
Thank you.
If Muhammad Ali
you,
was here, he would say, man, you trying to be prettier than me?
That could
Yeah,
never happen,
so it's
and
good.
neither as eloquent as he. I mean, you were married to one of the most handsome and eloquent men, and if you put those two things together, the most handsome, eloquent man ever to walk God's earth. That's really something.
Yeah, I like the pretty boys. I like the pretty boys. But this is the thing. It took a long time for me to finally put the book together. It took a lot of pain, a lot of hurt, things I had to heal. That's why I didn't do it before during his period, because divorce is never a nice thing. It's not a good thing. It's something that's very unexpected. I wanted to be married to him for the rest of my life, but things change, and I understand that. And it took a lot of time. The only thing about it is that during our divorce, I decided to just be friends and forgive each other for whatever we've done to each other. That was very hard to get over. But I decided, I said, look, man, we need to stay friends. We have beautiful children. We're going to stay friends no matter what. And so we did. He accepted that and said, yes, we're going to stay friends. You better be careful because we might fall in love again. I said, no. It's what it is. It's going to be okay. We have our 4 children. So it was a beautiful time with us because it was around his career. I was there for him in his hard, trying times. And it was just a beautiful relationship. It was a Cinderella story. I've been exposed to so many people and so much wisdom. And it's because of our friendship and our bondage that we had together that nobody will ever be able to understand. This is why the book is going to be covering the struggles that we went through together as a family. They say that Muhammad Ali suffered and he went through this and he went through that, but he didn't do it alone. He was with us. So he had a family going through it with him. So I can say that I was happy to go through it with him, to be very supportive of him. And we're going to keep the Ali legacy going because we made that legacy together as a family. And no matter what anybody says, I don't know. Yeah, you're going to say something?
I was going to ask, when you first met him, did it remotely occur to you that Muhammad Ali would become the most famous person on the earth? Were you aware of how big a personality he was going to be?
Well, I saw that, and he didn't see the big part of it. I saw a man that had potential. I saw a young man who had a lot of talent, and in order for him to survive this talent, being with my religion and supporting him in that religion, I knew it'll make him bigger than what he even dreamed he would be. Yes, he had talent, but the controversial part is to where we came in at. He is an expert when it comes to boxing. He had a certain style that nobody had. But I saw that potential blooming into something bigger. And I mean world bigger. He didn't see what I saw. He see what he saw as being a great champion. But I saw something bigger of him being a humanitarian, a person who would influence others. And that's what I focused on. And see, a lot of people come to me and ask me, what is it like being married to this great Muhammad Ali? Well, you have to understand, he wasn't always that great the way he is now. He wasn't that great then. He had to grow into that. That took time. That took struggle. That took sacrifice. All of that came before what you see now today. So I was with him in a different caliber. He was a talented person. He was a, very talkative, like you said, the Louisville up. But when he came with me, he had more to talk about other than just boxing. And that's why I stuck with the guy, you know what I mean? So, I do, of course, know what you mean. I made the point earlier, he had some very, very tough opponents. George Foreman was a very tough guy. Joe Frazier was a very tough guy. He fought and beat. Sonny Liston was a very tough guy. He beat him twice, stopped him twice. Now, any one of these, you would normally say, was his most fearsome opponent. But his biggest opponent was the U.S. government in the end, wasn't it? Yeah, that was the big one. That's the one I had to stand with him, by him with, and guide him through that. That's where I came in at. And I was the voice behind the man.
Tell us what that was like.
I was the voice behind the man.
Yeah, what was that like?
Well, especially when he was, I told him as a kid, I understand that they had drafted him. And before we married, he said, I'm going to go to Vietnam. They said I'm going to go to Vietnam, but I don't want to fight anybody. They said that it would be okay for me to fight like Joe Louis fought for the Army and everything, but fight in the ring like a boxer, like Joe Louis did. And I said, that's not going to fly well. That is not a good move. You shouldn't even sign your name on anything like that, because you can't trust a person who don't support you. So it's best not to sign your name at all. Don't even join in the Army, because my father was a veteran. And he said, you're not supposed to even draft people twice. Once they reject you once, you don't draft them twice. It was against the law to draft anybody twice. They drafted him twice so he could be an example. And I told him, do not sign and go to the Army. I know he didn't want to go to the Army to fight anybody. And I told him, I said, well, the Vietnamese have never lied to you and treated you bad and hung you on a tree. It said that you wasn't a intelligent citizen of the world. And this is what the slave mentality had taught a lot of Black people back in that day. And I said, man, don't sign your name on the paper. We're Muslims. We sacrifice our lives for our beliefs. And the best thing you could do is don't sign your name to go to the Army to fight in a ring. You can't sign your name for anything. He said, really? I said, no. I said, he said, what would you do if you was me? You already gave me a poem for Sonny Liston, and I was only 13 then. And I told him, and when I was 14, I said, you want to know what I would do? I would say, hell no, I ain't going to go. Clean out my cell. Take me to jail without bail. Hell no. That's what I would do. But see, I didn't tell Clay to go out there and tell those people that. He repeated everything I said, went and told those people. Now I'd have created a monster. So that was my feeling on it. And he believed whatever I felt, and he would have put it out there because I influenced him to do that. I didn't tell him to do it, but he did it because he liked what he heard. And that's when it started a big controversy. A lot of people don't know that about him and I. That's the thing. This is what this book is about, telling the little intricate things that inspired him. I was the one that inspired him to do things, and that's what he liked about me. I inspired him.
You gave him some of his best lines, and you've just quoted one of them there. Hell no, I won't go.
That was me altogether.
You also gave him other, now famous, and at the time incredibly electrifying. I mean, the things he said about why he wouldn't go to Vietnam. You were responsible for some of those best lines.
Absolutely.
Now that he's only watching from above, take some credit.
Yeah, but when I look at me supporting him all these years, I looked at us as a team. Whatever I said, he would say. I was very influential for him. And I was glad he listened to me. He listened to everything I said, and he liked what he heard, and he brought that out. And that was my whole intentions, is to give him enough inspiration to bring it out. I didn't know he would actually do it, but he did. And the Sonny Liston thing, I was only like 13 when he called me and said, I'm going to, we were just friends. You know, I was in the school of Elijah Muhammad. We were just friends. And I told him I didn't like Sonny Liston because before he even became a Muslim, Sonny Liston said he was going to knock out that black Muslim. And that hurt my feelings. And I said, I don't like this guy. So I wrote a poem for Clay when he came back to the mosque. I wrote a poem for him and said, look, you tell this to Sonny Liston because I don't like him. And I wrote it on a brown paper bag. And my dad saw Clay on TV with a brown paper bag reading the poem. And then my father asked me, he said, did you give a fighter a poem to read on a brown paper bag? I said, yeah. How did you find that out? And he said, well, he's on TV blazing away. So I go, what? And then I go and I see him with the brown paper bag, hold it up like this and reading it. And there was a little short poem. It was called I Am the Greatest that I wrote when I was 13. And the poem said,
tell us.
This is the legend of, how you want me to tell you the poem?
Yes.
You want me to tell you? This is the legend of Cassius Clay, the most beautiful fighter in the world today. This fist fight's great. He's got speed and endurance. But if you're trying to sign to fight him, increase your insurance. This kid's got a left. This kid's got a right. Look at the kid carry the fight. Oh, the crowd is getting frantic. There's not enough room. There Ali lowers the boom. That was the upgrade. Who would have thought when they came to the fight, they see a spook satellite. No one would dream when they put down their money. They see a total eclipse of the sunny. There he is. That was he made my point famous. I thank him for that.
That is absolutely brilliant. Dr. Ali, how can people get the book? Can we pre-order it?
Oh, you can go on Amazon. Yeah, you can go on Amazon. I have a website that's getting ready to go up now and it's not up yet. It's called MuhammadAli Speaks. No, MuhammadAli at .net. MuhammadAli.net.
MuhammadAli.net.
.net. It should be up in about a month. But you can go to Amazon and buy Undefeated on Amazon. But it says Undefeated, not the other one. It says Undefeated. So
fantastic talking to you, as always. I could talk to you George, all night, but yeah. Yeah.
Yes. You know what, George, is another thing for me is to make women aware, because women do so much for their men and guide them, and they should stick with them and support them. Don't run away. Just try to stick in there and try to support your man. Men are beautiful factors. They make a lot of mistakes. Of course, we all do. But forgiveness is very important. You have to forgive and try to be friends when you divorce, because it's just good for you. It's good for your soul. You have to forgive people.
Amen. Amen. Amen.
And I'm just
Thank
saying
you,
to
Doctor.
you, Can I say one thing to you, George? I pray every day for the health, and safety for all people in America, especially in the Ukraine and India, Libya, and all the countries that have had turmoil, tragedies in the weather. And we are praying for everybody in the world for peace and guidance, and try to get closer to your Creator. That's most important. People always following this person, following that person, have an opinion about this person. Don't worry about that. The Creator is in control of everything, and you have to stay connected to your Creator and be at peace.
Amen. Dr. Ali, thank you. God bless you. And I hope that your latest book is an enormous success. You're certainly sold a few copies on here this evening, I'm sure of that. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the Mother
I'll be joining.
All Talk Shows. Dr. Ali, that's a must-have book, I would say. Should gender reassignment for children be a criminal offense? Yes or no? It's a simple question, really. And the answer is important, because we have allowed a state of affairs to obtain in the darkness, in silence, because we were afraid to speak out and say no, and say enough is enough of this mania. It's time now for everyone to step up to the plate, as Muhammad Ali himself would have done. YouTube comments on Dr. Ali's interview. Joe Jones says, Ali did for boxing what Alex Higgins did for snooker and many other great sportsmen did for their sport. God bless them all. Amen. And Morpheus X says, give me one dark athlete or any athlete that would give up his career for justice of humanity against the mighty imperialist empire of the US. They robbed Ali the best age of his career in boxing for refusing to fight in Vietnam. And Toby Clear says, when Muhammad Ali decided to be true to his faith and refused to join the army, the wrath of an entire republic was visited on his head. He was stripped of his title and not allowed to work. The words of James Baldwin. An email from David. I too watched the Rumble in the Jungle live from a cinema and realized very quickly that this would go down as the greatest sporting moment of all time. It is the greatest sporting moment of all time. I defy you to produce a greater one. The greatest athlete on the greatest stage at his greatest. Great show. I've never forgotten that cinema in Blackpool. And for those of you abroad, cinemas in Blackpool in those days, in the early 1970s. Well, we're not talking the Ritz here. One more email from John, really enjoying the interview with Dr. Khalilah Camacho-Ali. I grew up loving Ali and remember getting up as a child at all hours of the morning with my late dad to watch Ali fight. There's only two celebrities that I cried for at their passing, John Lennon and Muhammad Ali. John from Ireland. I never finished telling the anecdote, I think, that my father and I got up in the middle of the night, and my father was the only white man in Britain, practically, who was supporting Ali. And I've never forgotten how we felt. I was just a kid when Liston didn't come out of his corner to continue the fight, and Ali became the champion of the whole wide world. Numbers 08081965522 in Britain and Ireland. In the US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. And the rest of the world, 44203 966 2625. Let me take a quick break, and then it's Jean from Hackney and Seamus from Enfield on the line. Stay tuned.
The 1897 edition of War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. Read by George Galloway. Available only on Patreon.
The cylinder was artificial, hollow, with an end that screwed out. Something within the cylinder was unscrewing the top. Good heavens, said Ogilvy. There's a man in it, men in it, half roasted to death, trying to escape. At once, with a quick mental leap, he linked the thing with the flash on Mars. The thought of the confined creature was so dreadful to him that he forgot the heat and went forward to the cylinder to help turn. But luckily, the dull radiation arrested him before he could burn his hands on the still glowing metal.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now, that was me reading War of the Worlds on my Patreon, patreon.com/George Galloway. I really depend on the people who support me in Patreon, and I'm deeply grateful to them. And they're growing now really quite significantly. So things are turning up for us, and I'm really glad and grateful about that. Please support us for the price of a cup of tea in an insalubrious cafe. If you can afford that per week, then please do it. Patreon.com/George Galloway. Julie is one of the new patrons. Hi, George. Julie from Australia. I love your podcast, and I'm glad I finally found your show, so I can finally hear people like you and your guests speak what I am thinking. Thank you, Julie. And Hafsa is a MOATS legend. That's the highest level that you can be on my Patreon. Kids can't vote, drink alcohol, or get married before 18. So how on God's green earth can they mutilate themselves before then? Indeed. Terry says it's a disgrace that children are subjected to an agenda adults of a dubious mentality have dreamt up and unbelievably are rewarded with a platform instead of legal proceedings. The West truly is a lost cause and an empire on the precipice. And Derek Reed says it's a total disgrace the way the woke society are becoming. I know a parent who was dressing her 2-year-old son in pink dresses, and hey presto, the boy is 10 years old and now a girl. There is no way that poor wee guy had any clue what he was at 2 years old. We've had lots of new calls tonight. If you're a new caller, then you're particularly welcome. If you're a woman caller, well, frankly, you're even more welcome. We just don't get enough women callers. So please, if you're a woman and you're a new caller, first-time caller, you'll definitely get on the show this evening. Jeannie is in Hackney on Julian Assange. Go ahead, please.
Hello, George. Thank you for giving me time to speak this evening. I'm a member of the Julian Assange Defense Committee, JADC. We're London-based, and we work with the DEA, the Don't Extradite Assange campaign. And also, just to say, the last time you saw any of us, or me anyway, was at the No to NATO conference at Bolivar Hall, which was 7 months ago.
Yes.
And I was one of the ones waving Assange placards, which all of you from the platform acknowledged. 7 months. How fast that 7 months has gone, and how much has happened to tighten up our ability to discuss, to share ideas, to have platforms on which dissident voices can be heard. It's really, really terrifying. But before I say more about that, if you want to give me time to do that, I do want to say that today is the 1st of October. Tomorrow is the re-sitting, the opening again of the courts after the summer recess. And therefore, we are expecting within the next few weeks, perhaps sooner or later, sometime in the not too distant future, to get the date for the last stage of the hearing appeal process against extradition for Julian Assange to be sent to the United States. It will be held at the Royal Courts of Justice at the Aldwych in London, and the Don't Extradite Assange campaign have put signs up everywhere. They're calling it Day X. We don't know when that will be, the exact day, because we're not given. We're kept in limbo. Whether that's deliberate or not, I'll leave other people to think about. The call out will come. It will be to appear at, or to get to the Royal Courts of Justice at 9 a.m. on the date when that information is sent out. If people would like to register for an alert, they can go on to the Don't Extradite Assange campaign website to do that. I would urge everyone who is in London, who can at all possibly be there physically, it is so, so important, because we have to be visible. We have to be seen on the streets. Our presence has to be there. We have to be sending a message to these people who are moving forward to shut us down, to shut any kind of dissident voices down at a speed which is breathtaking. You have had two programs recently. Sorry? Hello?
Yes, it is breathtaking.
It is. And it's dangerous. And I won't say the name, but RB is someone who has now come into the firing line and being treated exactly the same way as Julian Assange and WikiLeaks were, for exactly the same reasons. You have mentioned other people on a previous show, Alex Salmond, same thing, Craig Murray, same thing, Daniel Ellsberg, many years ago in 1972, same thing. And we have to...
And Roger Waters now. And now Roger Waters.
Yes.
No, Jeannie, it is sadly predictable and predicted. We did tell everyone that the arrest and imprisonment and pending extradition of Julian Assange was a harbinger of very great storms to come. Some were very slow to understand and appreciate it. Some have joined the campaign late, better late than never, but better early than late. And we are now reaching the end game. If Julian disappears into the maw of the US injustice system, it's not just that it will be a personal disaster for Julian Assange and those of us who love him, particularly, first and foremost, his wife and children. It'll be a disaster for all of us, because no journalist will ever again have the courage to do what Julian Assange did over and over again and expose the criminals. It has become a crime to expose the activities of the criminals. That's when you know you're living in a society on borrowed time. Jeannie in Hackney on Julian Assange, please sign up for that alert so you can be there at the High Court on the day. Seamus is in Enfield in London. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Seamus.
You all right, George?
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
I'm just trying to figure out when we're going to stop arming fascism in the Ukraine, stop arming the Nazis with taxpayers' money.
Well, this morning we were about to send soldiers in to train them in Ukraine At least that is something that has been walked back. But you're right, the rest of it, the billions that we need ourselves, are still being sent to the regime in Kiev. And the arms, the publicity, PR, every spin that anybody in the Western media puts on this Kiev regime, this is aiding and abetting fascism.
Exactly. But when the British media has a total blackout for the last 10 days nearly on what happened in Canada, then all these people's grandfathers and great-grandfathers and grannies and aunties and children died in World War II, and the British media just black it out altogether.
You see, just think of what Seamus just said there. And just think of the level of cynicism, dishonesty, wickedness, I would say evil, is involved in the British political and media class. Everybody on social media, on my own tweets alone, 10 million people, on just mine. Everybody on social media knows what happened in Canada. Nobody dependent on the so-called mainstream media has even heard of it. Think of the level of betrayal of duty, not least to their own audience and readership, that is required for that statement I've just made and Seamus has just made to be the truth, and truth it is. Think about that. Christian is in Northampton on Ukraine. Go ahead, Christian.
Hi, George. Good to speak to you. This incident with Hunker last week reminded me of something which happened to myself about 5 years ago. So I was driving around Lockerbie up in Scotland, and I spotted a road sign for a Ukrainian chapel. So I drove up to the chapel, and I was surprised to find like some Longkesh-style internment camps behind a chain link fence. So I took some photographs and done a bit of digging when I got home on the internet, and it turns out that this was a internment camp for Ukrainian POWs who were shipped from the Ukraine and from Germany to Scotland before being dispersed around the UK and around the world. Now, interestingly, Hunker lived for 5 years in my county of Northamptonshire before emigrating to Canada. Now, I'm wondering if there's a possibility that Hunker had been moved to the camp just outside Lockerbie before being dispersed into, down to Northamptonshire. I just wondered if you knew anything about the camp.
Yeah. Well, it's such a good call. I'm going to forgive you for not knowing that. I have told that very story several times here on the Mother of All Talk Shows, because I live quite close to that prisoner of war camp, and I had the same experience as you. I saw a sign for a Ukrainian chapel, thought that's funny, and then saw the Longkesh style huts that were part of the Ukrainian prisoners of war. And it actually took me some seconds to work out that if these were Ukrainian prisoners of war in this camp in Scotland, that means they were fighting for Adolf Hitler. Just like that fellow they gave the prolonged and stormy applause to in the Canadian Parliament. Christian, many, many thanks for a beautiful call. The poll is still running. Should gender reassignment for children be a criminal offence? Yes or no? It's a simple question, really. Coming up after the break is the one and only Professor Seyed Mohammad Marandi, Professor of English, Literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran. One of the best speakers you'll ever hear from the Middle East. You don't want to miss it. I'll be right back. Thank you. Go ahead.
During your show in the past, you've often mentioned that Donald Trump would be a much better alternative than Biden, although you weren't a big fan of him, etc. And you said that in all likeliness, if he gets in power, he'll be much more appeasing towards Putin. There'll be less likely of the conflict to escalate. But I have to tell you, I'm not so sure about that. Really, I think the only way to solve all this, it doesn't matter if Kenny gets in or anyone else, because there's always going to be, at one stage of our lifetime, two psychotic leaders of the superpowers. Why hasn't anyone in your show or yourself mentioned anything about nuclear disarmament or CND? Surely the only way to save humanity is by nuclear disarmament. And I just wanted to see what you thought about that.
Yeah, well, of course, but how are you going to get that? I mean, does CND even still exist? They could have been leafleting outside every cinema showing Oppenheimer. But of course, they don't have enough people to fill a telephone box. It is the worst example I know of, although the Stop the War Coalition runs it close, of an organization that for its sectarian, internal, political reasons has thrown away its brand. I have not appeared on a Stop the War platform for an entire decade. Not to worry, no to NATO, no to war. Its rival organization attracts exponentially larger numbers of people. They cannot help themselves, these people. These members of leftist groupuscles have it in their DNA that they cannot get along with anybody who isn't exactly like them. And as the number of people who are exactly like them is mercifully tiny, they end up in tiny organizations. So, of course, I'm in favor of the destruction of nuclear weapons. But how are you going to get that? It's a totally utopian slogan to advance at this point in time. I'm just trying to stop the weapons from being used.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Professor Marandi from the University of Tehran has educated us all many, many times on the mother of all talk shows. But when you look at the audience numbers, nobody ever gets tired of his quiet and exact eloquence. And I'm glad to say he's back on the show with us this evening. Professor, thanks again for joining us. We will look more widely at the global situation, but if I can start in your own neck of the woods, are the talks on nuclear questions between Iran and the United States going to happen? Will they ever restart, or will this be just another casualty?
It's very difficult to say. The good news is that the United States put aside its preconditions for the prisoner swap. And so the Iranian prisoners and the American prisoners were released, and so were Iranian assets which were effectively stolen by the Americans, assets that were both in South Korea as well as in Iraq and elsewhere. A bit less, I think, than $20 billion were released. So the fact that the Americans put aside preconditions, allowed this prisoner swap to take place and to have Iranian assets released shows that changes are taking place. Those changes, of course, are largely, in my opinion, due to the heightened confrontation with Russia and with China, and the fact that the Americans simply have too much on their plate. But in any case, it is a good sign. Whether that translates into a breakthrough at the nuclear talks, that remains to be seen.
Yes, but when will we see it? I mean, is this something that's in the long grass and we'll know if it happens? Or are there any dates, any schedules that we can measure as having been met or missed?
Well, exchanges, messages are being exchanged between the two sides. So indirect talks between Iran and the United States do take place. And of course, the Iranians are talking with the Europeans. I'd like to very briefly just remind your audience what happened in the past. In 2015, Iran and the P5+1, which included the United States and its European partners, they signed a nuclear deal. And from day one, the Americans violated the deal under Obama. And as the Obama administration moved forward, they increasingly violated their side of the bargain. And so did the Europeans alongside the Americans. Whereas the Iranians from day one, they were very strict about all of their commitments. And the International Atomic Energy Agency repeatedly, I think 15 times maybe, stated that the Iranians are committed to all of their obligations. And then, of course, Trump left the deal. Biden despite promising to return the deal, he never did. And he continues with the so-called maximum pressure sanctions, which are targeting Iranian women and children. But in any case, when the new Iranian administration came to power, the talks were revived in Vienna. And I was in Vienna for the talks. They were very close to a deal after weeks of negotiations. And ultimately, at the last day of the talks in Vienna, the EU gave a text to all of the delegations who were going home. The Iranians took that text. It met Iran's requirements, except for three small points. The Iranians made some changes, 3 changes, sent it back to the EU. And then Joseph Borrell said that the Iranian demands are reasonable. At that point, we thought we had a deal because Borrell is an ally of the United States. But the Americans delayed their response. Then they gave a non-response. And it was because of the midterm elections in the US. The Biden team was afraid of Trump resurgence or resurging his supporters gaining power in the Senate and Congress. So they delayed, and then we had the riots in Iran. The Americans and the Europeans miscalculated. They thought something was going to happen in Iran. And so all of that we were delayed for a long time. So we really had a deal, but the Americans just couldn't take the final step. And today we are still where we were. But since the prisoner swap took place and Iranian assets were released, and as I said, the Americans removed their precondition, that is a positive sign. So it is possible that we may have a breakthrough in the future, but nothing is for certain because, as I said in the past, the Americans were unwilling to take that very last step.
Why bother, Professor? You've got your prisoners, you've got the stolen funds returned to you. You have closer and closer relations with the rising part of the world. Why bother with the part of the world that's sinking?
Well, that is a case that is being made by a part of the Iranian political establishment. They're saying that Iran has joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. More importantly, for economic purposes, it's now joined BRICS, and Iran has improved ties with Central Asian countries, neighbors in the Persian Gulf, and as you pointed out, they've signed a deal, or they've had a deal with the Americans to exchange prisoners and have their assets released. However, the Iranians are still hoping that the United States and the Europeans will come to their senses and they will be prepared to have some sort of reasonable relationship with Iran. But time is not on the side of the Americans. It's not on the side of the Europeans. They have too many problems. They have problems with Russia. They have problems with China. They're losing influence in Latin America and Africa. Even in our region, we see that they're having problems maintaining their hegemony. It would be smart for them to change their policy towards Iran, but it is very difficult for them to rethink their relationship with Iran or their absence of a meaningful relationship with the country.
Well, you saw what happened when they gave you your money back that they had stolen from you and made this prisoner exchange. Biden was severely attacked by Republicans, by supporters of Donald Trump, amongst others, who made out that Biden had actually given you this money as a gift, ignoring that it was your money that they had stolen. I mean, you couldn't make it up, but they did.
Well, George, one of the things about the United States is that once they go down a road, it's very difficult for them to go back. You know as well as I, you know better than I, that when apartheid South Africa was in place, Nelson Mandela, when he was in prison, the United States considered him a terrorist, and the ANC, the African National Congress, as a terrorist organization. Apartheid collapsed. Mr. Mandela became President Mandela. He was still a terrorist. He retired from office. He was still a terrorist. So was the ANC. And only, I think, in 2012, years after he left power, I think around 2012, did they remove the ANC and President Mandela from the books. So that's how the United States functions. It's the arrogance of power. That's why they simply can't retreat with regards to their policy in Ukraine or with regards to Taiwan or with regards to Iran. It's very difficult. I think a large part of it has to do with the arrogance of power. It has to do with empire. It has to do with this sense of exceptionalism that prevents them from being able to take a step back and to shift gear, to change policy, and to behave in a different way because they look down at countries like Iran. It's almost impossible for them to come to respect countries like Iran.
One of the difficulties they're having is with Saudi Arabia. It was a major part of the US government's plan to be able to go into the next presidential election with rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Israel, recognition. Saudi Arabia joining the laughably called Abrahamic Accords, sacrilege actually. But the Saudis are refusing. The Crown Prince, MBS, whatever his other faults, is doing something of a good job in altering course, a course which they've been on since their very foundation in relation to American politics. Is that how it's seen from Tehran?
It does seem that so far Mohammed bin Salman is sort of hedging his bets, that he sees that the United States is on the decline, like many others, and therefore he wants to improve ties with Russia, with China, with Iran. And also Mohammed bin Salman does not love the Biden team or Biden himself. So he does have a vested interest in waiting out Biden and perhaps even by keeping the price of oil up to hurt Biden for the upcoming presidential election. Of course, there are talks going on between the United States and Saudi Arabia about some sort of deal, especially with regards to Israel, the Israeli regime. We don't know where that's going, but without a doubt, we have seen a change in the behavior of Saudi Arabia towards the United States, regardless of whether there's going to be some sort of deal with the Israeli regime or not, because there's a lot of talk, but we don't see it happening yet. But there is a change, and I think we've seen it happen in Africa, Niger, and the changes that are taking place there. In the Persian Gulf region, other countries are also rethinking their ties. Latin America, it's the whole global South or the non-Western world is definitely becoming more cautious about their relationship with the United States, their future with the United States. They feel that the United States cannot, for some of their client regimes, they feel they can't be protected, and for other countries, they want to have better relations with others because they see change taking place. That's very clear in our part of the world.
If we regard a position of no war, no peace as the midpoint, how would you calibrate the state of relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia today? Better than that, I suspect, better than no war, no peace, but how much better?
Yes, it is important. It is very important. The Persian Gulf is a very sensitive region. It's perhaps in some ways the most sensitive region in the world, because if there's insecurity here, the whole global economy would collapse. Saudi Arabia has traditionally been supporting extremist groups like Wahhabi groups. They supported the extremism that we saw rise in Afghanistan in the 1980s and the 1990s, Al-Qaeda or Al-Qaeda, and it grew in Syria and in Libya, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, other countries in the Persian Gulf, and of course Turkey had a huge role to play in the rise of these extremist groups in Syria. And of course, they still exist in northern Syria because the Turks continue to support Al-Qaeda and among others. So Saudi Arabia has done a lot to support these groups, and they've caused huge problems for the whole region. So the less tensions in the Persian Gulf region, the less incentive there is for Saudi Arabia to support such groups. Mohammed bin Salman, it would seem, by nature, is not a big fan of those groups anyway. So regardless of what he did to Jamal Khashoggi or to Qatar or to the former prime minister of Lebanon or the war in Yemen, a positive element of his leadership has been that he has distanced himself from these extremist Wahhabi Takfiri groups. So Iran would like to see better relations, not only because it's good for security across the region and it weakens terrorism, but also because this region, if it wants to develop, countries in the Persian Gulf and in West Asia, they have to be able to do business, trade. They have to be able to at least have some sort of relative trust towards one another. And of course, there are many opportunities. The north-south corridor that Iran and Russia is developing, this is important to link, because it will link Russia to the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean. The Saudis can make benefit of that. They can do trade with Russia. They can do trade with with Central Asian countries as well. So there is a lot that is happening, and the Saudis could be a part of that. And of course, the Iranians also have a lot of interest economically, culturally, religiously in having good relations with Saudi Arabia as well.
Finally, Professor, your president was in New York for the General Assembly. A hooligan sought to disrupt his speech but was unceremoniously ejected from the hall. Quite extraordinary behavior at the United Nations, I must say. Did he, you think, take the temperature in America? I mean, you're in a difficult situation in Iran. Almost whoever wins between Biden and Trump, if that is the final lineup, it's not good for Iran. Both of them have committed egregious crimes against Iran. I'm wondering then if you're kind of hoping, like I am, that Robert F. Kennedy might make a decent showing. How do you think people in Iran view the upcoming presidential poll?
Well, if Robert F. Kennedy is able to leave the Democratic Party and step forward as an independent, he'll still have major problems because there are at least 10 states that will almost certainly not allow him to gather votes there. It's a very difficult process in the United States to get on the ballot across the country, but in some states it's more difficult than others. So he really has a very small outside chance. And as you know, recently he's become very hawkish and supportive of the Israeli regime, which I find very odd, taking into account the rest of his policies. They don't match at all. But so let's put him aside momentarily. It doesn't really matter, as you point out, if it's Trump or Biden when it comes to foreign policy, at least in our part of the world and most of the global south. Maybe with regards to the war in Ukraine, there would be a difference, but elsewhere, I think there's not really that much of a difference between the two. But as you pointed out at the beginning of the interview, the changes that are taking place, the rise of BRICS, the rise of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the shifting balance of power, which is taking place at a very rapid pace. And thanks to Western policies, it's speeding up. The war in Ukraine, I think, is pushing the change that we were all expecting and seeing in previous years. It's pushing it forward much faster than we'd ever seen before. It's quite stunning how rapidly things are changing. So I think that for Iran, the future does look much better. Actually, in the last quarter, the Iranian economy grew by 6.2%. Iran's relations with China, with India, with Russia are improving rapidly. So the situation in general for Iran is much better. And I think it is significant. You made you were speaking about the Israeli regime and their ambassador to the UN and how he tried to protest against President Raisi during his speech, and he was expelled from the hall, which was quite extraordinary. But I think even that is symbolic. It is revealing in that the Israelis are losing. I believe that the Israelis are becoming increasingly nervous about their future. This is sort of symbolic, and that's why his erratic behavior, I think, is sort of revealing. But when you look at the media in Israel, when you see what's going on, the divisions in Israel, how the Israeli regime is becoming unpopular in Europe and in North America, especially among many young Jews, I think that does not bode well for the regime. And that lack of self-confidence, the regime that used to be, have the invincible army, and they were they were the regional power, they dominated the region, or at least that's what we were told. That is no longer the case. And I think that itself is going to be ultimately an incentive. This weakness in Tel Aviv, it's going to create a greater incentive in Europe and North America to rethink their policy towards Iran. The world is tilting away from the West. They need countries like Iran because of what they've done to Russia and China. And the Israeli regime is having a much more difficult time than before in isolating Iran. So although I'm not naive, I don't think we're going to have good relations with the United States or the Europeans anytime soon. But the world is changing in a big way, but also in a subtle way simultaneously too.
Professor, thank you as always for a wonderful tour of the horizon, both in the Middle East and beyond. Much obliged to you. Should gender reassignment for children be a criminal offense? Yes or no? 23,567 people have voted, and I'll give you the result towards the end of the show. But first, let me take a quick break. You don't get to call me far right. You don't get to call me that on my own show. A lifelong socialist. the leader of a socialist party, the Workers' Party of Britain, with an Indonesian wife, with 5 mixed-race children, with a record of fighting racism all of my life, representing more people of colour in the British Parliament than anyone in history by a country mile. You don't get to call me far right. These kind of idiotic insults tossed around by infantile leftists who think that anyone to the right of them is a fascist, is a racist. They are the cause of the crashing and burning of what used to be called the left. They are the cause of it. They have discredited leftism with their foolish, idiotic isms and ists and smears that emanate from them like a bad smell.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Email from Derek. Hello, George. There were Polish prisoners of war camps in this country as well. I used to drive past one often when I lived in Bari around 30 to 35 years ago, just outside Bridgend. The huts were still there then. Abdul is on the line from France, but talking about Ukraine. I told you, this is the global university of the airwaves. Abdul, what would you like to say?
Hello, George. I am Abdul Aziz from France. I have 2 brief questions from you. First question about Ukraine. Is it a long war like Afghanistan or Vietnam? Or because daily when we look at the news sites, and there are pledges of weapons and money for more war, or it will last in 2024 or not. And second question about Pakistan, will the journalists will held election with or without Imran Khan? Will they kill it, then will do, or they will do with Imran Khan? These are my 2 questions.
Well, let me answer the last question. Let me answer the second one first. Elections without Imran Khan are not worthy of the name elections, and no one should give them any credibility at all. This is Hamlet without the prince. This is an election of ciphers, of nobodies, with no political support in the country, and the person with majority political support in the country excluded. So if the elections take place, and it's still an if as far as I'm concerned, without Imran Khan, then they are not elections. They constitute a further crime against the people of Pakistan. But on your first question, having seen the jail conditions in which this beautiful and exalted man, who was the Prime Minister of Pakistan just a year ago, a man who is the world's most famous Pakistani, a man who captained their cricket team to greatness, a man admired and respected throughout the world, is literally stinking in a dungeon with an open gash in the floor of his cell as his latrine, who is now forbidden even to walk outside for an hour a day for exercise, which he was hitherto enjoying, if that's the word. And then on top of that, there is the very strong suspicion that there are people in the jail working for the regime who will murder him in his prison cell, who will murder him in a jail. And if that happens, then Pakistan will become uncontrollable, as I have been warning here on the mother of all talk shows from the beginning. It would be an uncontrollable 200 million people in a nuclear armed state, in a place so geostrategically sensitive and important that one could describe it as a nuclear powder keg without any exaggeration. What could possibly go wrong? So if these Western leaders, whose puppets are now in power in Islamabad, have any sense at all, and I know that it's difficult sometimes to ascertain the level of lunacy of which they're capable, but if they have any sense of it all, they will keep Imran Khan alive, first of all. They will make his conditions in prison such that he will not die of poisoning in a rancid jail, and they will ensure that these stooge replacements step aside and have an election worthy of the name. Meaningful elections can only happen if Imran Khan is on the ballot paper. But the stooges cannot allow him to be on the ballot paper, because if he is, he will win an overwhelming majority. And then where will those stooges be? You might well ask yourself. Thanks for the call. Some comments on the poll. 72 Marshflower 15. Classical liberal here. Hands off the kids. Just say no to gender dysphoria. Rachel Thompson says trans isn't a fashion. It's only one innate aspect of human variation. Maybe so, Rachel. I have no problem if grown-assed men decide that now they are women, but I won't allow you to reassign children as the opposite sex. I will not allow it. I will not give my consent to it. I mean, I can't stop it, but I will not give my consent to it, and I will not stay quiet about it, however many laws they pass. Richard Kasparian says, who supports and pushes the trans movement? Richard, that's the $64,000 question, to which there is no answer. I get a lot of answers when I pose it, but none of them persuade me. It's the one thing in my life that I simply don't understand. How this trans mania so quickly and so comprehensively conquered the public space, captured the commanding heights of politics and government, national, local, health service, everything. How they managed to make it first impolite, second unacceptable, and third illegal to speak out against this transmania. I don't understand the phenomenon, and I don't understand the scale and pace with which it conquered all before it. But it ain't conquered me, and I'll go on speaking out against it. Deef says boys should never be forced to wear a dress. If a boy wants to, that's his decision, but forcing a boy to wear one is just wrong on any level. Trevor is in Cambridgeshire in England on the Canadian Parliament. It's the Global University of the Airwaves. Trev, go ahead.
Good evening, George. First of all, yes to your poll, absolutely. The fact that we have to have this conversation about whether we should, distract children with all this nonsense is farcical. But on the point of this SS war criminal that was vetted and then invited into the Canadian Parliament. Now, as a at least third-generation service person, I served. Actually, I was at Long Kesh, as you mentioned earlier, but my dad done 9 years and my granddad was killed in Monte Cassino in 1944. So to have this piece of shit invited into the Parliament and to have the best and brightest of Canadian Parliament stand and give this disgusting criminal a standing ovation is sickening beyond belief. So that's my emotional side out of the way. But I'm relieved. I'm relieved because, thankfully, it will take something on this magnitude to wake people up as to what is happening in Ukraine as in relation to the truth behind it. The Azov Battalion. Now, the BBC were running videos in 2014, 15, 16, and 17 about how disgusting these Azov Nazis are, and yet all of a sudden, when the narrative changes, bang, it's finished. It's disgusting.
It is, Trevor. Trevor, it is disgusting. And as I mentioned earlier, the fact that none of the mainstream media have even reported what happened in the Canadian Parliament that you and I are talking about, and every one of our audience knows what we're talking about. But if your old mother or your auntie or John Doe or Mary Doe is not on social media, is relying on the BBC, they don't even know that it happened, Trevor. That is disgusting. That is the level of cynical distortion by concealment that these so-called mainstream media are concerned. Now, both my grandfathers fought at Monte Cassino in the 8th Army under Montgomery, where your own grandfather fell. So I salute his memory and the memory of all of the British service personnel and those who served at home, who stood up to fascism for a short time, ourselves alone, and without whom there would have been no Second World War to win, because it would have been over in 1941 with the Hitlerites declaring victory. And I just repeat what I said earlier, and you as an ex-military man will get my point. Do our armed services not deserve better than GrantShapps? Seriously? Thanks for your call, Trev. Now look, it's China's National Day, and our sister program in German, MOATSaufDeutsch, which goes out on Sundays right before this show and can be seen with subtitles tomorrow or the next day. MOATSaufDeutsch is a must to learn what's going on in Germany and how things look from a German perspective. But one of the remarkable things about the host of MOATSaufDeutsch, Dr. Diether Dehm, who is a former parliamentarian of note in the German parliament, is that he can play the guitar and sing much better than me. And today, on the show, they sang the Chinese National Anthem. Listen.
起来，为原则努力的人们，爸爸们的时候，就像我们新的长上，掌握民族照耀最完善的时候。每个人被派着发出最好的呼声，起来，起来，起来！我们完成一心，冒着敌人的炮火前进，冒着敌人的炮火前进，前进，前进，前。
C'est magnifique. The great Paul Robeson was the second of those singers, but Dr. Diether Dehm, the presenter of MOATSaufDeutsch, was the first. Well done, lads. David in Swindon is on the line about a local story that he's gone. Steve in Gloucestershire then is up next. Steve, what would you like to talk about?
Hi, George. Steve, thank you for letting me on your show. I'm really concerned about the fact that no one's mentioning about the Canadian Parliament about 2 weeks ago when they had a Nazi and they were saluting him and clapping him and God knows what. So what I'm asking for is why aren't we asking for Starmer, if not the government, to repel what they was doing and
I suppose we're not asking because it would be a waste of breath. The mainstream media have literally blacked out that event. Nobody dependent on the mainstream media even knows that it happened. And that's because the so-called mainstream media is in lockstep with the entire political class. There is not one. This has never happened before. I mean, never. Even in the days before universal suffrage, when at least there was a Charles James Fox in the House who could be counted on to stand up and oppose the orthodoxies of the day. And in the Cold War, in the time of universal suffrage, there was 100 members of parliament. In the case of the Iraq War, there were over 200 members of parliament who opposed the Iraq War. The Ukraine war is opposed by precisely 0 members of parliament, not a single one. And so the government can do anything that it likes, and it is doing anything that it likes. So there would be no point, above all, Steve, of asking Starmer the Stumer. What could we possibly expect from him? Last word to you, Steve.
Thank you, George. All I'm saying is that we got a conference in a week or two. I'm not even a Labour Party member, but I would stand outside them doors and say, Starmer, what are you going to say about the parliamentary candidate, the Canadian parliamentary establishment saying that they applaud a Nazi? That's all I'm saying. And that's what we should do.
Yeah, well, it's a point well made. Where is their conference this year?
Liverpool, I think. Let's get out there and bloody say, Starmer, are you a Nazi or are you what? We all got suspended from the party for being anti-Semitic. They are the anti-Semitics. They are. And that's what I'm just going to say. Thanks, George. You're a legend.
Well said, Steve. Well said, Steve. Good call. 24,000 people have now voted. Should gender reassignment for children be a criminal offence? On Telegram, 97% say yes, it should be a criminal offence. On Twitter, 91%. On the YouTube community poll, 97%. And on the YouTube stream, 94%. 97, 91, 97, 94. These are stunning results from a massive poll of 24,000 people. Is anybody in the media, in the political class, listening to this vox populi? It would appear not. How many of us have to be against this in order to stop it? We rightly campaign, devote resources to opposing the hideous, foul brutality of female genital mutilation, FGM. Everybody knows how utterly we curse it and fight against it and devote police resources to it. But when it comes to gender reassignment of children, which includes some mutilation, oftentimes, by the way, the police resources are devoted against us for saying no, not in our name. Isn't something wrong there? Why can't other people in power, see it? June Robertson on Julian Assange. I wonder how Julian Assange is being treated. Well, very badly indeed. This is well over a decade of incarceration of one kind or another for the crime of telling the truth about the liars and the criminals. Tim S. says, I don't understand why he needs to be extradited at all. Indeed so. Neil Curry says, heartbreaking to see one of the world's greatest investigative journalists being treated as the foulest of criminals by the foulest of criminals. And Karen Smetanovska says Joe Biden doesn't even know who Assange is. And Dervish says, I'm glad I found your channel, George. You tell the truth. There are so much fake news, especially on YouTube, by other video bloggers. I absolutely love your channel. I listen to every word you say. Thank you, my dear friend. David is back from Swindon about a story that has really captured the imagination in Britain. David's here to tell us about it. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, there's a sycamore tree that's along Hadrian's Wall that was in the film, which is purely fictitious, of Robin Hood. You had Kevin Costner and Morgan Freeman there for about 10 minutes in the film. And you think the world had ended because the BBC, the ITV, Sky News, all had reporters there about this tree that had been cut down. Now, it was a beautiful tree, but people would think it was actually real. I mean, the tree itself is 300 years old. The Robin Hood story is probably 800 or 900 years old. But it may seem a trivial thing to phone about, but the fact is, and it goes through the thread of your show, the coverage that was morning till night about this tree being chopped down. They had forensics there. It was like CSI New York. They had people taking samples. They had interviews with the local people about it. So it just goes to the juxtaposition of how much TV time they took to covering this tree.
Yeah.
And yet, your other callers on the Ukraine Parliament must have had about a tenth of the time.
Zero. Zero. No, I mean, they'll make a panorama. I have no idea what or who it's about tomorrow night. But I doubt if it's going to be one of the targets that it should be. I doubt if Panorama is giving over an hour tomorrow night on the BBC to delving more deeply into the scandal of Prince Andrew paying a victim £12 million of the Queen's money, which meant in the end our money, to obtain a dropping of the prosecution and the silencing of his accuser. I doubt if that's what's on tomorrow. I doubt if it's on Peter Mandelson's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. I doubt if it's on who Ghislaine Maxwell was trafficking children to. I doubt if it's the scandal of the military-industrial complex growing fat and richer on the backs of dead and dying people whose lives are destroyed by the weaponry that these merchants of death are producing. I doubt if it's on any of these things. I don't know what it's about. But I suspect it'll be a bit like that famous Channel 4 documentary a few weeks ago about someone whose name I cannot mention, because if I did, Big Tech would algorithmically suppress this broadcast. So it has been grossly in excess by comparison with other things. But I've got to tell you, I'm very sorry about the tree being cut down. I like trees. A 300-year-old tree is something to be. A giant sycamore tree under which people have proposed marriage, have had family picnics, and had Kevin Costner cavorting in a green tunic as Robin Hood is something to be. But we better say no more, because a 16-year-old boy has been arrested and charged in relation to the cutting down of this tree. A legend on the line, Sarkar in Glasgow on NATO. Go ahead, Sarkar.
Good evening, George. George, today I don't know whether I'm calling because I'm angry or I'm sad. Angry because seeing the repeated mistakes of NATO, on and on, going on and on like clockwork, trying to provoke wars. Angry for that. Sad because there are some people who still believe NATO is a force for good, because they learn nothing from Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan. They learn nothing from Ukraine. They learn nothing from the latest development. That is with what is happening in Kosovo and Serbia. George, believe me, people who don't know, people who think that NATO only intervened, that these countries are mentioned, they don't know what they did in Yugoslavia in 1994, 1993. They don't know that. And they still believe what NATO is doing is good. Kosovo and Serbia, Kosovo is a part of Serbia, I personally believe, and history proves it. Kosovo has been trying for separatism, but they don't know that in the land of Kosovo, which they call an independent Kosovo, there's so many Serbs over there. There has been a bit of fraction between them, which happens in every country. But for NATO to say that we'll now send our troops over there because they believe that the Serbs are going to take, are literally stifling the Kosovans and not letting them gain independence, George, that doesn't augur well. Every country who has been neutral or saying or exposed the hypocrisy of Ukraine or even being remotely associated with Russia for trade deals, they are being chastised, they are being humiliated. This Kosovo wound has been opened up again. I don't know what the future would be, George. I'd like to hear your views.
Well, I think that you should look on the bright side. The result of the election in Slovakia will not be the last such election. There's more than 1 million people on a demonstration in Warsaw in Poland today, all over East and Central Europe, all over Germany, and eventually all over France, probably not all over Britain, because we are backward in coming forward in that regard, but all over Europe, and I believe in North America. In the United States, at least, and it will crystallize in the elections next year, people are comprehensively rejecting the NATO government sacrifice of their own national interests and the prosperity and prospects of their own people in order to serve the diktat of the gerontocratic early onset Alzheimer patient sitting in the White House. People instinctively feel this is not right. This is not wise. This is not the proper use of our resources, and it might lead to disaster. That's why I believe when the Russian government, in the form of Medvedev, responded to GrantShapps' cretinistic idiocy in the Daily Telegraph by making plain that Russia would regard not just any British military forces in Ukraine as a legitimate and legal target, they would be target number one. They would be the target of every Russian gun, missile, rocket, bomb until they had been destroyed. I believe when Medvedev made that point on social media early this morning, that RishiSunak and his mandarins in Whitehall took fright. Now, of course, I'm not in second place to anyone in supporting Serbia in relation to this Kosovan question. And there is no doubt at all that NATO, failing in one area, is seeking to inflame a political situation in another. Kosovo is Serbia. It will always be Serbia. The world will never recognize the breakaway of Kosovo. The Serbian government will never, could never recognize the theft of a part of their own country any more than you or I, Sarkar, could accept that a thief could come in and take over the ground floor of our house, and we live upstairs in the top floor in cramped conditions, whilst they cavort downstairs in the best rooms in the house. You think we'd ever accept that? Well, that's what you'd be asking Serbia to accept, and they never, ever will. Captain Blimp on Assange says, I keep saying this, why doesn't the Australian government just give Julian diplomatic status? He will be able to go home without hindrance. And Frank Carlisle says, responding to the sycamore tree story, Costner was the worst Robin Hood in cinematic history. Who's the one I'm thinking of on TV? Was it Richard Green is a name that's in my mind. VJ says, there are many sycamore trees where I live, and it's known Sycamore Lane. A lot of people are Sycamore stories. So let's go on to Prince, the legend in Texas, on Canada. How's that for internationalism? On you go, Prince.
Hey, George. Good evening or good afternoon. So I have one slight thing I disagree with you on, but like I said, I've always watched you for a great time. I have utmost admiration for you. So I look at the Nazi thing a little bit differently. You see, the Western government has never really had a problem with Nazism. It's just always I think the main reason why these guys never really liked Hitler was because he went against that global agenda. It's not they were cool with it. I mean, Churchill slaughtered 1 million people in India, slaughtered 1 million people in Kenya. So these people, De Gaulle did the same thing in Algeria. So they've never had a problem with genocide or the other stuff. It's just always been something which they use to scare people, which this whole Nazi thing. In America, you can't even talk about anything. They even accuse black people of being Nazis. They accuse everybody of being Nazis, except when it's actual Nazis, then they fund them, they sponsor them. So it's not even a mistake. It's not even something which was now they pretend it's a mistake. It's not a mistake. They know exactly what they were doing. Nazis, after the Second World War, they took a bunch of them. You think they just smuggled them to Argentina by mistake? They took a few scapegoats, tried them in Nuremberg, and then the main ones, they actually incorporated them into Western government. They were in a very high places. So Nazism has always been part of the Western ideology. I want to skip to the second point, which is about...
Well, look, Prince, no, I don't have time for your second point because your first point was so very good. I want to quit while we are ahead because of the hour. A good and clever friend of mine was just saying to me this very morning that in the United States, there are thousands of Holocaust memorials, and quite rightly so. The Holocaust, the greatest crime in human history, in the sense that its intention was to physically annihilate every single person of the Jewish religion, every single one. This genocide failed because of the Red Army, because of the victories of the Russian Soviet forces in the Second World War. And if that victory had not happened, then the Holocaust would have continued. But to go back to my friend's point, there are thousands of memorials in the United States to the Holocaust that took place in Europe. But there are no memorials to the Holocaust perpetrated by the Americans themselves against their native population. And precious few, even in high-heeled jacks, lipstick-wearing progressive outpost of Canada. And in Latin America, hardly any at all. But 100 million, 100 million original Americans were wiped out by European colonialism in the Americas from Canada to Chile. You try finding a memorial to that particular Holocaust in the United States. You'll look long and hard. There's a legend on the line. Last call of the evening. It is Norma in Bristol. Norma, what would you like to say?
Well, only a couple of points because it's very late now. I just wanted to say I enjoyed the ex-wife of Muhammad Ali. I thought she was refreshing and she had humor.
Wasn't she wonderful? Yeah.
Yeah, she was. She was. And then just quickly, we did actually, like you, stay up and we watched the fight of Cassius Clay against Sonny Liston years ago. But you did say you wanted an update on my husband, so I'm just going to tell you that we visited him today, but he has to be moved entirely now by a hoist, which is, sad deterioration. And we're waiting to see if that government money for 3 months has been agreed, we know by Tuesday, so they can move him to a nursing home. But, after that, who knows? It would just be blooming scandal. If we had to pay or have means tested, if he lived, we had to pay, for any money after 3 months if he was still alive. So that's my update.
Well, it's a very eagerly awaited update, albeit sad news for all of us here at the Mother of All Talk Shows. And I'm sure all of the audience around the world, our hearts are with you and with your husband at this very difficult time in your lives after such a long and happy marriage together. God bless you, Norma, and preserve your health. Unfortunately, it's the end of the show. I hope you enjoyed it tonight. I thought we had a couple of cracking guests. We had new callers dealing with some of the most important issues in the world today and the sycamore tree. That's all we've got time for, but the good news is, God willing, I'll be back on Wednesday at the slightly later time of 9 p.m. UK. So bring another viewer with you, if you will, so that we can grow and grow this open university of the airwaves. And follow me, support me on patreon.com/George Galloway. Why don't you? Good night.